welcome to the pre-session webinar for the Acceleration Through Career Pathways Regional Training, brought to you as part of the AEBG Technical Assistance Project. My name is Cherise Moore, and I'm a senior researcher with the American Institutes for Research. I am pleased to introduce Kathleen Porter and Uta Masha, who will be our facilitators today. Let me tell you a little bit about them. Kathleen Porter has been involved with adult education and workforce development in San Diego since 1987. Kathleen is currently the Executive Director of Career Technical Adult and Alternative Education in the Poway Unified School District. Kathleen also serves in a variety of state and regional leadership roles, including CalPro's Professional Advisory Board, the California Council for Adult Education, and the AXA Adult Education Council. Uta Masha has been managing the Adult Education Block Grant for San Diego's East County AEB Consortium, known as the East Region Adult Education Consortium, since 2015. She has more than 15 years of experience in training and curriculum design and nonprofit program management. I am pleased to leave you in their good hands to finish the rest of this webinar. Kathleen.
Thank you, Cherise. And so this is Kathleen, and I'm going to be driving us through most of this webinar with Uta kind of chiming in. So Uta, do you want to say hello to everyone first?
Yes, hello everyone. I will indeed chime in every once in a while, but mostly talk about our Dyson later.
Thank you, Uta. So what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. And as we look at this, I wanted to give us kind of the big overview of the regional trainings that we have planned through AEBG TAP on this subject, Acceleration Through Career Pathways. So you've already read a pre-webinar reading, and that was your Breaking Through Practice Guide on Accelerated Learning from Jobs for the Future. Now we're participating in this webinar today, and then at the conclusion of the webinar, we'll have an interim reading assignment that's going to reinforce some of the concepts that we talk about today and some of the concepts you read about prior to the webinar. And then we'll have our regional face-to-face meetings, and depending on what region you are, those meetings will occur at different dates. So the objectives that we're going to cover today, or of the webinar today, are really for us to develop a common understanding of career pathways and their importance, to talk about adult education's role in that career pathway process. We're going to have an opportunity to explore 9 different accelerated learning strategies. We'll take a deep dive into one accelerated math program example. And then before we conclude, we'll talk a little bit about that interim assignment before we have our face-to-face regional meeting. So I want to start out with what is a career pathway? And, you know, I realized that I didn't do my housekeeping work. We had some housekeeping things that I want to do. So before we get into this content, let me just click over here on the housekeeping items. So what we have are a few handouts that you should be able to see here. And we've got 3 handouts for the session today. One is a packet of, that has all of our work. Then we also have a graphic organizer to help kind of keep straight those 9 different accelerated learning strategies. And then we have an article that's going to be our interim reading assignment. So if you'd like to download these, you can do that by clicking on them and then clicking on the download file little button at the bottom of your screen. If you wanted to download all of the files and you use this little hamburger icon that's over toward the right of the handout section, you can click on that, and you'll have an opportunity to download all of the handouts. And so as we walk through the PowerPoint and this webinar today, at several times I'm going to be asking you to refer to your handouts, and you'll be writing responses down as we go through some of the content. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint slide now. And so you can see on handout 1, at the top of page 2, we have a little spot for you to jot down in 3 to 5 words how you describe a career pathway. So I'm just going to give you a few seconds to think about that and jot down your response. If you're still writing, that's fine. You're just taking a few seconds to jot down 3 to 5 words to describe what you think a career pathway is. One of the things we've known is that career pathways has come up in almost every conversation about educational reform. And one of the things that we also know is that people describe career pathways in a lot of different ways. As a matter of fact, very recently, Carolyn Zachary from California Department of Education called a meeting together with K-12 folks and community college folks and adult ed folks, and they came together to try to define career pathways. And at the end of the day, they didn't have a single definition that would work for everyone. Some of us think that we have a career pathway program if we offer some career technical education training. But we're going to dive into this whole idea of career pathways in a little bit deeper way right now and look at some of the elements that might go into a quality career pathway program and what distinguishes a career pathway program from a standalone career technical education program. So one of the things we know is that the U.S. Department of Education, Health and Human Services, and the Department of Labor at the federal level have made this commitment to promote the use of career pathways approaches as a promising strategy to help our adults move forward in reaching their goals. CLASP, which is the Center for Law and Social Policy, established the Alliance for Quality Career Pathways. And what they identified are 3 different ingredients that go into quality career pathways. And those ingredients are well-connected and transparent education, training, credentialing, and support services for students. The second ingredient is really multiple entry points, and then the third, multiple exit points. So when we think about what is well-connected and transparent education, who does education need to be transparent for? We're talking about making a difference so that any student, regardless of who their counselor is, would know about the choices within that pathway, would know how to navigate a pathway. And so we're talking about our teachers knowing about the pathway and the connections. We're talking about students. We're talking about other institutions. And so this idea of well-connected is really part of the regional planning that we're seeing in a lot of different initiatives right now, including AEBG. Multiple entry points in this particular model, the graphic, which is also in your handout. It might be a little easier to see in your handout. It's on page 2, the bottom of page 2. You can see that in this model, students have the opportunity to enter at different places and exit as they need to maybe go back to work or to care for family. It's that whole notion of stopping out of educational experiences and then hopping back on without having to start over from go, if that makes sense. So we know California's Workforce Development Plan also references career pathway programs. And as you'll see in these different quotes, they're really using that CLASP model as informing our workforce development plan. So you see that they talk about varied and flexible means of entry, exit, and participation. They talk about these multiple on and off ramps and innovative scheduling practices. They talk about being student-focused so that we're really designing systems or pathways for our students with those students in mind. And then we're also looking at these flexible exit points that allow for some short-term serial efforts. And then over time, students would be able to progress through higher levels of education and training. We also see that there's a high degree of program alignment and service coordination, some of which we've talked about as part of those regional planning efforts. So we know that our workforce development boards have worked on regional plans. We know that the Strong Workforce Initiative for our community colleges have worked on regional plans. We've been working on regional plans within our adult education block grants. So regional planning is coming up again and again. And it's all really driven by this joint commitment to career pathways. We look at receipt of industry valued credentials. There's been a lot of discussion about that and also about employer engagement. So we're talking about really looking at the labor market and the needs of the future. So what are we offering, and are these things aligned to our labor market needs? So the WIOA definition of career pathways is pretty specific. You can see here it talks about aligning with those labor market needs we just talked about. It talks about preparing students to be successful in a full range of secondary or post-secondary options. It talks about including counseling and support. It talks about education offered concurrently and in the same context as workforce preparation activities. So this might be the first time that we start to see this notion of contextualized learning in a definition of career pathways. We start to see this idea of accelerating here, that a career pathway is going to organize education, training, and other services to meet the particular needs of an individual in a manner that accelerates the educational and career advancement of that person. We also look at leading to credentials, so we saw that in California's workforce plan. And we also see here helping students enter or advance within specific occupational clusters or occupational areas. So when I look at this definition, one of the things that always strikes me is that between F and G is this little word, and. So really when we're talking about career pathways, we're not saying that it's one of these things. We're saying that a career pathway program is all of these things. So what I'd like for you to do is think a little bit about those different elements and to think about what elements does your adult education program offer. So if you have a career pathway program, what are the elements that you have? And do you have all of those elements? So when we think about adult education's role, and this is in your handout at the top of page 4, so it's handout 1 at the top of page 4. If you just want to take a minute and reflect on how it is that your program does some of these things and which things might be missing. Because the real trick as we plan to move forward in this is stringing these different elements together in this way that is coherent and sequenced and transparent and easily communicated to others. So I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds to think about that. Okay, so I'm assuming that you've had a chance to check some of the elements that you may already have in place, and then you can start thinking about how you're going to build on those things. So as we looked at the definition of career pathways, the one thing that we're really focusing on in this particular regional training are the methods of accelerating, and so that's that the little subset E. That's where we're going to be focusing on today and in our regional trainings. So thinking about that, on the bottom of page 4 in your handout packet, you have a little box where I'd like for you to take a minute and just write down a couple of ideas that you have about why acceleration is important. What is it that we're trying to do with acceleration? Why are we embarking on this effort? So I'm imagining that you've had a little time to think about acceleration and why do we care about accelerating students. And so I'm imagining that some of the things that you've had a chance to write down on your box might be that we really want to be aware of students' time. Our students need to work, and so we want to provide educational experiences and training opportunities for them that are going to meet their needs as quickly and expediently as possible. One of the other things we're starting to respond to are things that we're hearing from employers about skills gaps, that we hear from employers that our students come to them without soft skills or basic skills or applied skills. We hear about students having an insufficient level of college or career readiness. And one of the things that we read about in the Jobs for the Future Breaking Through article before this webinar is really looking at the disconnect that we have in programs where when we have lots of prerequisites or when students aren't able to enter a pathway without remediation, that there's just more and more opportunities for students to drop out of programs if we have lots of prerequisites. So we start thinking about co-requisite models for students rather than prerequisite models. We look at an inadequately trained local workforce, so basically our employers are saying we need people quickly, we want people right away, and then we are also seeing high dropout rates. And so really when we're talking about career pathways and we're talking about acceleration, we're talking about providing opportunities for our students to move them through expediently, quickly, efficiently, so that they can get into the workforce. We're also responding to this shift in the end game of how educational programs are really valued or evaluated. And so I think there was a big shift in the 1990s. If any of you were around like I was in those days, you might remember that there was a big shift from teaching to learning. And so prior to that time, a teacher might have said, well, I taught the material. It's not my fault that students weren't learning. And so there was a shift that really said, hey, we want to measure the effectiveness of teaching by looking at what students are learning. And that's when we started talking about all kinds of different interventions to come in, or different ways of teaching, differentiating instruction, so that we were able to meet individual students' needs. We also talked a lot about personalized learning at that time. So that was a huge shift. I think right now we're experiencing another huge shift, and that shift is to go beyond course completion. So we're not measuring our effectiveness by whether or not a student earned a high school equivalency or earned a diploma or completed a course successfully, but we're really measuring our effectiveness as to whether or not students were placed and were successful at the next level that they wanted to go in their career pathway. So it's just changing that whole notion of how we do things. And that these become some of the outcome measures that we're now starting to see with our different funding sources. So defining accelerated learning, it's basically an intensive method of study which enables material to be learned in a relatively short period of time. We have a definition here that talks about really what can accelerated learning achieve. So it can create the transformed infrastructure and delivery modes that are required to meet the goals of expanding access, closing achievement gaps, assisting workers to advance, and transitioning learners to credit-bearing post-secondary educational or occupational training. So some of the things that stand out to me in this particular slide are this idea of transforming our infrastructure. We're not doing things the same way. We're really talking about a transformation in how we're approaching providing training to our students and providing education to our students in order for them to access that training and better jobs. So as we talk about our accelerated learning strategies, we've broken these strategies down into 3 different areas: customization, contextualization, and compression strategies. And we have 3 strategies that we're going to go through quickly in each of those areas. And again, this is reinforcement from the reading that you did prior to the webinar. And you should be looking at handout 2 right now. That we have a graphic organizer for you. As I talk through some of these strategies, you'll have a chance to write down on your chart some of the key features or examples, any questions that you have. And when we have our first face-to-face meeting, this is what we'll review. We'll go through this. So when we look at compression first, we're going to talk about 3 different strategies within the compression arena, the compression family, I guess I'll call it. And so the first one is to accelerate course timelines. And so an example of this is basically just to increase the frequency of instruction so that the course material is covered in a shorter period of time. So an example would be maybe an accounting course that was offered over 18 weeks. 1 time a week is now offered twice a week over a period of 9 weeks, if that makes sense. The second one is to add an online element to a face-to-face course. So in this strategy, we're really talking about blended learning opportunities for students. And I know one of the examples that we've looked at is a model where we supplemented medical instruction with online program to work on anatomy and physiology. Those anatomy and physiology elements were something that students were really struggling with, and so for them to be able to work on those things at their own time and at their own pace and from home was an opportunity for students to be more successful in the class. Some of us are using Burlington English and our English as a second language programs. That would be an opportunity for us to provide blended learning. The other idea is really offering short-term courses and boot camps. So we're hearing a lot about quick reviews or jump starts. That's what I would call these things. That maybe you offer a 3-week course right before a training program to brush up on specific math skills that students would need before they start a program. So I'm going to give you a few minutes here to put on your graphic organizer any of these thoughts that you might want to do about compression strategies. And then I'm going to move us along to the next family we're going to look at. So the next family we'll take a look at are going to be our customization strategies. And so again, we're looking at 3 different customization strategies. So one of them is to modify class schedules to meet the needs of students. So the example that I talk about a lot with this one is we used to offer a nurse assistant program that was offered Monday through Thursday from 7:15 to 2 in the afternoon. We found that our attendance was dwindling, and so we began to offer that program on Friday nights and all day on Saturday. And that gave students who were working a chance to come to the program. It also gave students who were caregivers during the day a chance to come to the program. And so it's a pretty radical shift, but really looking at what are the students' needs. I also know that in LA, they began offering some of their English as a second language courses at 5 o'clock in the morning before students were going out to work rather than at the end of the day. So radical shifts in how we schedule our courses to meet needs of students. Another idea is modularizing content, and so this is what I call chunking a course. It's basically taking a course that maybe, I'm just going to use an 18-week model, and then chunking it into smaller units to create frequent starting points for students. So an example that we did with this one was an auto program. If we chunked the course into 6-week units, then we could have a 1-week quick start unit that would allow students to start at any one of those 6-week modules. And then finally, assessing students' knowledge at intake and giving students credit or placing students based on their prior learnings. So this is where curriculum alignment kinds of activities really come into place. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes here to write down some of the customization strategies on your graphic organizer. And then I am going to move on to our next family. So take just a couple minutes here. Okay, so last family we're going to take a look at are contextualization strategies. And I'm going to run through these fairly quickly. So we look at these integrated education and training models, and so these examples could include co-teaching, alternating teaching, offering either VESSL or VABE specific classes, or some cluster VESSL and VABE classes. Another one is to contextualize instruction. So in this case, we're really looking at taking a look at how we link the academic content into the context of whatever occupational skills training that we're trying to do. The final one that we're going to look at today is this idea of integrating career awareness into our curriculum. So it's also contextualizing instruction, but instead of offering contextualized instruction in a specific occupational area, we might integrate soft skills or different kinds of job search skills, anything that we can do to expose students to different careers into our curriculum. So our projects would be based on some of the development or practice of some of those soft skills. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes here to write some things down on your graphic organizer. Again, you're looking at handout number 2. So if you want to take a couple minutes to do that, a couple seconds, then I'm going to push us on to our next spot. Okay, so now I am sure you're very tired of hearing my voice, and I'm glad to be able to turn things over to Uta. And Uta, do you want to just take a minute and tell us a little bit about what is going on at Cuyamaca College with their math remediation program? So this is the deep dive portion of the program.
Yes, and I think it's a very exciting deep dive. Kathleen, you mentioned transformation earlier, and Cuyamaca College has really been the first community college in California to completely transform their math remediation and their whole math department. They changed everything from how they assess and place students into their math courses to the courses they offer and to what happens in the classroom. And that last piece, to what happens in the classroom, is really the exciting piece. And the data they collected so far shows the results are quite incredible. So we met with the math department lead, Tammy Marshall, and interviewed her about her successes, about her experience with this whole project, and we simply wanted to learn from her how this all happened. So we're going to watch this video. It's about 18 minutes long. It's a really exciting video. It will not seem that long. There are some key issues we might want to pay attention to and take a look at. So, for example, how does Tammy describe the process? Why did it start? How did they start? What were the changes they went through? And what are the lessons they learned? And finally, how they define acceleration for themselves. In your handouts number 1 on page 6, we prepared a little text box for you to jot down notes. So enjoy the video.
Hello everyone, my name is Masha. I'm the AEBG Grant Manager for our East Region Adult Education Consortium here in East San Diego. And we're here today at Cuyamaca College to talk with Tammy Marshall, the chair of the math department and a spearheading the acceleration project at Cuyamaca College. And we thought we would meet up with you to ask you, the experts, some questions about acceleration and the project at Cuyamaca. So thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, of course, thank you.
So let's start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about the project.
But we started looking into accelerating students back in 2010 when we went to a conference or a workshop with the California Acceleration Project. And so we started our Pre-Stats Academy, which is a one-semester course that led directly, I should say leads, we still have the class, leads directly into statistics. And when we started seeing the success of this course, we started asking ourselves, how can we scale this up? How can we make this even bigger? How can this work for all students, for STEM students, for business students? She was invited to a workshop where she learned about the 3 high leverage strategies from the California Acceleration Project. I'll call that CAP from now on, that's what it stands for. And the 3 high leverage strategies are to accelerate remediation, which is like our pre-stats class, to change placement policies, and then co-requisite. So we started to looking at changing placement policies, but really the research had to be done on how do we do co-requisite models? What is that? What does it entail? What is involved in all of that? And so through all of that research, we then created what we have called the Math Pathway Program. And we've called it that because we recognize that in mathematics, depending on a student's major, it depends on what math course they need. So not everybody needs the same math course. Some, like STEM students, they all need to go through calculus, right? So everybody goes through a specific pathway. But if you are a social work or a psychology major or something along those lines, you may only need to go through a statistics pathway. So we started to look at what are these different pathways and how do we accelerate the students through these pathways. And so we created co-requisite courses for our first tier transfer courses as well as our intermediate algebra course. And then really as we looked at what is called the leaky pipeline, when you look at this, you start to understand that the more courses there are, the more opportunity there is for students to drop out, right? They call it the leaky pipeline because there's these spots where it leaks out, so it's like water, you know, it's like a water pipe with holes in it, but in this case it's students dropping out. And so when we looked at that, the idea was to reduce that, right? So that reduce the number of areas or points, exit points for the students. So we, at that point, decided to also stop teaching any course below intermediate algebra. So it's important to understand that intermediate algebra for us at the community college level is the lowest course or the lowest level of a course that a student would take for an associate degree.
It started in 2010.
Yes.
With I hear you.
That was when we started researching. The class started fall of 11.
So there was one of the problems you wanted to solve was this leaky pipe.
Yes.
And then there were also remediation courses that you sort of wanted to see go away.
Yes.
So at that point in time, did faculty already sort of think about acceleration? Was it within the math department itself? How did the faculty come on board, and how did it become such a big project?
So back when it started, it wasn't such a big project. It was tiny, and we were thinking about the leaky pipeline and eliminating courses, but we were thinking about it only for students who were going through statistics. Does that make sense? We weren't thinking about it on a broad scale. So it was really in the spring of 2015 that we really started to think about this on a much broader scale. Everybody was in favor of it. When we started to look at the broader scale of things, there was a lot of conversation that we had to have. You know, not everybody was on board at first, and there were times that we would go into each other's offices and we would say, okay, remind me why we're doing this again, and we would have to just reconvince each other sometimes because of the enormity of the work. And then they started doing co-requisites with English, and we were doing co-requisites with math. So we kind of got them on board, and then ESL started to come on board. So then it became a monstrosity at the college. I'll be honest. It was really, it's a lot of work, but it's worth it because we're saving students, train loads, plane loads of students every day. When you looked at the data of that leaky pipeline, a student who assessed at 3 levels below transfer, only 4% of them in our college were getting through a transfer class in 3 years. And statewide, it was only 6%. So it's not like we were that much lower. And so really it was that. It was that kind of data that when you look at it, you have to stop and you have to say to yourself, it's not the students. Like, stop looking at the students and saying it's their fault. And we needed to turn the mirror around and look at ourselves and say, there's something wrong here. The students that are coming to us are the students. Those are our students, and they are who they are. Why are we not meeting their needs? And that's really what it boiled down to.
So can you describe a moment when you felt in the classroom, yes, this is working?
When they're seeing students get it, when we're seeing the data, it's when we're seeing the number of students that are getting out in a shorter period of time. I mean, we went from first-time students who were placed below transfer level in the fall of 2015. So if a first-time student in the fall of 2015 that placed below a transfer level, in 1 year, only 10% of them completed a transfer level class. Whereas in the fall of 2016, students who placed below transfer level but were given access to a transfer course with co-requisite support is 67%. From 10% to 67% by just simply giving them access to transfer level with support.
From your perspective, also as a department chair and then also sort of spearheading this work, how did you change? How did the faculty change in the process? Did it change?
You know, it did. No, it had to. It had to change. Our classrooms changed. We started realizing that if our students were going to be in class 6 or 8 hours a week, then we can't stand at the board and lecture at them the entire time. So we completely changed the classroom environment to a student-centered learning environment. We do specific types of activities in those classes as well, along with productive struggle, what we call brains-on learning, really brains-on activities, where the students have to have their brains on. It's kind of how we think about it. That productive struggle is so important because it's so important that the students understand life isn't handed to them. And what I mean by that is most people will say, well, yeah, I know life isn't handed to me. And I say, yes, but when you come to math class, you think that math is handed to you. So therefore, it's not. You need to struggle through this. If I'm your employer, I'm not going to come up to you and I'm not going to say, here's the problem, and by the way, here's how to solve it. Now solve it. Right. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to say, here's the problem, figure it out. Right? And so our job is to teach students how to do that. So I tell the students, listen, of course I know how to do it. That's not the question. The question is, do you know how to do it? Or can you figure it out? With guided help, guided discovery, talking to each other, working in groups. And so we really encourage that. So that changed in our classrooms. That was hard, especially when you are a teacher who has been using lecture your entire life. That was so difficult for so many teachers, and still is. Some teachers are still learning, right? And none of us have perfected it. And we always say, I don't know that I'll ever perfect it, but it's an important part of the process. In addition, I think all of us are just more open to students and who they are and their stories, to get to know our students and get to know their stories a little bit better, and recognize the biases that we all have. And then to work through those biases to close the equity gap, which we haven't talked about, but that is one of our biggest goals, is we always say we want to annihilate the equity gap. We want it gone. There should be no equity gap whatsoever for any of the for anybody, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's gender, you know, whether it's sexual bias, whatever it may be, right? There should be no equity gap. We really have done a good job of working with our faculty and having our faculty recognize that when a student is doing something, if they're coming in late 10 minutes every day, to have a conversation with that student instead of just assuming that they are coming in late because they don't care. Maybe their bus doesn't come until a specific time and they can't get there until then, right? Maybe it's a student, they're the first person in their family who's gone to college and they don't feel like they belong. There's no sense of belonging to them whatsoever, especially for students of color. That's huge. So it definitely changed us. It made us turn the mirror around, look at ourselves.
It sounds impressive and exciting.
It is.
What would you do differently if you started again?
People ask me that and I'm never sure how to answer it. I guess, well, let me answer the question. I do want to answer it. I don't know that I would have done anything differently. There are a couple of things that I didn't do, or that we didn't do soon enough. Counseling was huge. Working with counseling was huge. And I would have worked with them sooner. We worked with them early, but I wish I had worked with them a little bit sooner. They asked questions that made us change things that we were doing that were so important. Going through curriculum was important. We didn't work with information systems early enough in making changes when we were making placement changes. We didn't work with information. A lot of people think, oh, it's just a couple months. You only need to give them a couple months and then, right? No, they need a lot more time than that. And so there were those small things. We say we're cliff jumpers and that we jumped off the cliff. That's what we always say about ourselves. And I wouldn't change that we jumped off the cliff. That we eliminated all those courses and that we went full in on co-requisite support. There were some mistakes that we made, but those mistakes were part of the learning process. And so there were, you know, we were spending so much time talking about managing student expectations that we didn't spend any time talking about managing faculty expectations. Oh, that was huge. It was a huge mistake. So that's so important. You have to manage faculty expectations. And you have to manage administrator expectations. And you have to manage faculty expectations outside your department. And then there's training that has to happen, not only within your department, but counseling and across the college. And it's so important to work with others across the college as well. So we're very excited, as you know, to work now with you and opening up that communication so that students who are going through non-credit and adult education, that we can create some seamless pathway for those students into our college so that they know if I take this, if I do these things, I've got a seamless transition to math and English or ESL. And we're working on that, and I'm very excited. So, you know, there's one of the other things we're working on. And so,
one last question.
Okay.
Not a fair one.
Uh-oh.
For someone who is not really familiar with it, but already knows that it's not working, how would you define acceleration?
No, that's actually a very fair question. We actually don't like the term acceleration. And the reason we don't like the term acceleration is because to a student, acceleration sounds like you're doing the exact same work, but faster. But that's not what we're doing. The students aren't doing the exact same thing. What they're doing, or what we've done, is change and alter curriculum to meet the needs the students have for the next course. So for instance, in using that backward design, we're able to determine what real skills do the students need to be successful in this class. If intermediate algebra is a prerequisite for all these different classes, it's a monstrous class with all these skills, but not all those skills are needed in every single one of those classes. And as a matter of fact, there's skills that you learn in intermediate algebra that you don't need until you get to calculus 2 or 3. So why are we teaching them there? Really, we should be teaching them somewhere else. And so, so using this backward design, we're able to determine what skills, what prerequisite skills are truly necessary for students to succeed in that next class, that statistics class, or that quantitative reasoning class, or that pre-calculus class, or business calculus, right? What skills do they need to succeed in that? And then using that just-in-time remediation, where in our support classes, where we're able to determine really just in time when we're doing it, not front-loading all the basic skills or the remediation or the prerequisite, but instead seeing what the students are capable of and then saying, okay, they need a refresher on this. You know, when we teach these, it's one teacher, it's a seamless class. Our support classes, while it's a separate course, they're taught together. The student doesn't know when they're going from one class to another. So we're able to do it that way. But so to us, acceleration is not really a good term. It's really adjusting curriculum. And we are not compromising rigor. We are not changing our what we call our parent courses, which is those quantitative reasoning, pre-calculus, statistics. Those courses are the same. What we do in those courses is exactly the same as what we were doing before. So we're not compromising rigor. We just know the students are capable of doing the work. And that's really important, is to believe in student capacity. You can't do this work without believing in student capacity.
So just-in-time, rigorous
backward design.
Support of student capacities.
Uta, thank you so much for that interview. Every time I watch it, I am just more and more impressed with the program at Cuyamaca College, and what a nice job you did of interviewing. Good work.
Thank you. I am always impressed how big this project is and how much enthusiasm and energy there is on that campus. So ESL teachers, English teachers, they are all in it now with this really strong belief in the students. And what Tammy just said, that they are not compromising on rigor. You can see that everywhere, also with the students who are peer mentoring each other, helping each other, being actually excited about the challenges that are now in the program. So yeah, it's an amazing project.
Very nice. So folks, what we're going to ask you to do right now is just take a couple of minutes for your own recollection and just jot down maybe a couple of things that you might be thinking now about accelerated learning that you weren't thinking before the webinar. So just a few seconds here. I'll mute and let you do some writing. This is also in your handout. Okay, I know that maybe wasn't quite enough time for everybody, but I do want to kind of push us along. I do want to remind you as you're watching this webinar that you certainly have the opportunity to pause yourself. I probably should have told you that way earlier. Sorry about that. But you do have the chance to pause, and if you want to see things again, of course, you can rewind. So I'm going to scoot us along here. And we're going to dive into the next step. So the handout 3 that we had is an interim reading assignment, and it's entitled Leading the Way, Cuyamaca College Transforms Math Remediation. So this is an opportunity for you to read the article about the math program you just heard about in the interview with Uta and with Tammy. And then you will attend the face-to-face regional meeting that you're scheduled for. So I know we have one in San Diego on April 6th, and the LA region is on May 18th. So you should have that information in your email. And when you come to that face-to-face session, I wanted to remind you to please bring your webinar handout packet with your notes. Please bring the graphic organizer for the strategies 1 through 9 that we explored today. And then if you could also bring copies of the pre-session and interim reading assignments. So you'll bring that Breaking Through Practice Guide and also the Leading the Way Cuyamaca College article to our face-to-face meetings. And then as we're closing, I want to revisit our objectives here today. So we had a chance to talk about developing a common understanding of what career pathways are and why they're important. We talked about how adult education plays a role in career pathway process. We got a chance to explore 9 different accelerated learning strategies. We got to learn about 1 accelerated math program. We had a chance to quickly review the interim assignment in this whirlwind webinar here. So as we're closing, I just want to go through the last few slides and show you what we have here. So we do have more information. If you wanted to contact aebg.org, you'll find the AEBG Technical Assistance opportunities on the website. There's also a place where you can post questions or ask for assistance. I've got a number of different references and resources here if you wanted to learn more about any of these things. So we've listed those here in the last couple slides. And then finally you have both Uta and my contact information. So that is our webinar this afternoon. I do want to thank Uta once again for joining me and helping me with this. She's been a great help. So thank you, Uta.
My pleasure.
And did you want a chance to say goodbye?
Yes, thank you. Acceleration is a truly exciting development in our work, and adult education is on it. So thank you.
Okay, great, everyone. So we're going to say goodbye now, and I'm looking forward to seeing you at our regional training sessions.